Isobel, great to see you, and thanks for making time to come and have a chat. I know you're busy because you've got a very important meeting with investors after this conversation, so I do appreciate you making a bit of time for us. Just to start, then, you started out as a professional horsewoman, and then you became a nurse and went into the kind of medical world, and now you're building tech companies, and it's not your first gig either. I mean, just tell us about how you started over there and ended up over here, because that's quite an interesting journey.
I suppose a little bit of it's by accident. So originally, when I went through school, I wasn't particularly academic, as in I wasn't really interested or engaged. Did go through to my A levels, and I've always scored well academically, but was passionate about horses
Hmm.
and believed at the time that I was going to be an Olympic horse rider. And unfortunately, I then had an accident, and really because of family kind of was accountable to them, and they said that I basically needed to get a real job, and what was I
Right.
doing with
Okay.
my life, and then ended up in nursing because my family predominantly in the healthcare sector, and so went into nursing thinking, oh, it'll be fine, and I wanted to be emergency response diver for um, rescue missions for the bends and diving
Right.
and in
Right.
Egypt in the decompression chambers. And then it didn't work out that way. Ended up going into nursing and then following the corporate line in leadership, and mainly out of frustration. So I'd always get to one level and then be frustrated with the system and want to change and be quite vocal about it. And again, probably slightly delusional maybe about it, and maybe over optimistic. And just kept working my way up through the ranks, then completed masters in whatever I was interested in that time. So one was in pulmonary rehabilitation, then I did it in neuro, then I did
Right.
clinical leadership just to kind of tick a box, actually, just to get to where I needed to get to. Um, and then left nursing from a senior role and started really advising small medium enterprise clinics that were wanting to scale from seed to Series A and
Right.
establish themselves and stability operationally, and would predominantly go in as kind of an interim COO in an advisory capacity, um, and flipping companies really from distress to success. But they all had the same problems, which were the systems, and most specialities or industries are built on systems, which I'd obviously become accustomed to, and found there was displacement in the tech that they were using because it wasn't built specifically for what they
Right.
needed. The people starting these small, medium enterprises really weren't interested in tech because, or understood tech because their priority was building an operational clinic. So then ultimately became so frustrated with it and would go into clinics time and time again, see the same problems, couldn't get all of the data that I wanted to be able to help them quicker. And so I started building Pathway22 AI. And then from there, it's just been an evolution of when it's your own company, learning everything from the bottom. And I've learnt code, learnt to build my own LLM, about OCRs, language that I wasn't familiar with, and just trial and error. And I suppose, again, a bit of naivety in not being scared to fail because I'm technically somewhat right at the bottom again.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you describe that because that phrase you've just used is I'm not afraid to fail. I mean, actually, to learn anything at a really high level, you have to be willing to get it wrong, don't you? I mean, so getting it wrong is part of, and the willingness to get it wrong is part of how you learn. So it's quite interesting that you describe it that way because I think that's probably my reading of it is that that is probably what makes you such a quick learner. Let me ask though about the stuff from being a professional horsewoman. What is it that you've taken with you from that? I mean, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and a number of them come from, high performing sports background of one type or another. And there's often a lot of stuff that they learn early on in sport that they're then able to transfer into other things. I mean, did that happen to you? What sort of things were you able to transfer?
Oh, I think a lot, actually, a lot of discipline. I mean, I horse riding was always very expensive, and for me, I was literally working at a stable to be able to get my lessons. So I suppose that was instilled really early on, that I had to work to get better.
Yeah.
And then alongside that, when you're then competing, it's there's a lot of preparation mentally that goes into it. There's a lot of learning that you will fail and you're never quite good enough because there's always somebody better
Yeah.
as well, I think. And how do you manage that? And I think with horse riding particularly, it is attention to detail, because everything you're doing, even mentally, if you've got, it sounds a bit out there, but horse riders will understand what I'm saying. Your horse is in tune with how you're thinking. So there were occasions when I was too scared to do a jump and my horse would refuse, because that energy transfers to your horse. And I've obviously done something, whether it's in my body or my movement, that then has got my horse to be like, we're not doing this. And that has happened. And I think that then has transpired later on in my life and how I manage things and deal with things in one, learning and adapting, because also when you're riding an animal as well, you have to learn and adapt to that animal. Not every horse moves the same way, or has the same behaviors or personality. And I suppose that's applicable to business as well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
working relationships. So you become more adaptable.
Yeah. I mean, you would think, on the face of it, that communicating with a horse, which is what you're doing to help that horse do the things that you need it to do to compete successfully, you would think that that would be harder than communicating with people. I mean, has that been your experience? I mean, or is it, I mean, how do you feel about you? Do you use the same skills that you use to communicate with horses? Do you use the same sort of thinking and same approach in terms of communicating with your team? I mean, how does that transfer across?
No, because a horse is more likely to kill me
Right.
than a team. So definitely not. I think with the team, that's just because that's come with maturity. There came
Right.
a stage when I was moving. I was relatively young when I went up the ranks in nursing. I'm still probably relatively young, and I was probably more overtly aggressive in my approach to management, because I suppose one, being female in a more male dominated environment, two, being younger, also had an impact. And so I suppose to be heard, I became a bit more aggressive in my approach. And what I mean by that is not kind of violently aggressive, just a bit more forthcoming in my opinions and how I thought things should be. And yes, it got me up to a certain stage, but then I had to kind of pull it back and learn to listen and navigate through that. I suppose also because of the cohort of experts that I was working with as well, had also learnt that. So then I had to adapt the way I communicated. So I think that's been more maturity and the environment that I've been in. And even today, I think I'm naturally a very reactive person anyway. And I'm normally 10 steps ahead and can rush people through. And that's an error on my judgment. And I've had to learn to pull that back, to listen, even if I think I know what they're going to say, which sounds really arrogant. But actually, sometimes that's where I can miss attention to detail and can get it wrong. I think that's been a big learning lesson.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're saying is that the key really to moving from to making those transitions is the ability to adapt successfully, to be flexible, to adapt, and to deploy skills that you might have learned early on, to deploy them in slightly different ways to move you forward. I mean, is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, and it always becomes a refinement and a balance. And I don't know if I'll ever get it completely right. I don't know if anybody ever does. I mean, especially when you've got projects, targets, and you've got to close things quickly. Sometimes you can't be that mindful about how you communicate. My teams would probably still say there's days when I'm really good and there's days when I'm not so good, because it depends on the pressure that you've got going on at that time.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, I mean, days when you just need to get stuff done. I mean, just talk to me about that. One of the things that I see in very successful business people is they have this ability to get stuff done in often quite difficult circumstances. I mean, how do you approach those situations where you're thinking this is going to be hard, but I have to do this? how do I get from A to B? I mean, what's your, tell us about your mindset in those situations.
Again, it's probably naive delusion.
Mhm.
I don't think anything is unachievable as long as you keep moving forward. And it's exactly as you just emphasized. You will never grow or become successful if you stay within this
Mm.
box of limited thinking. And there always has to be a goal. So whether it's that I've gone into a clinic, obviously for a clinic, I want to have positive patient outcomes and I want clients to come back. But also, if I'm in charge of that clinic, I need to operationally function and we need to make money. So the goal is conversion and sales. Similarly to building Pathway, my goal right now is to fundraise, and I've just got to keep going until I'm going to get 1,000 no's, and that's okay. And some of them are good, and I get feedback, and I evolve from that. Of even from starting that investment journey, it's been very much like that. I've learned, adapted, changed, taken feedback. Now I'm, more confident and grown, and I've gained experience from that. Um, and that's the goal. I will get investment. I have set a date and I just have to keep going. And it's like building the platform. I just have to keep building it and just keep going. And it's probably again deluded naivety, maybe.
Or determination.
Maybe,
I
yes.
mean, I think determination is pretty important. I mean, and one of the things you talked about also was your interest in kind of preventative health. And one of the things that strikes me about that journey that you've been on is that what you've done is adapted as the situation has required. Are you interested in preventative health? Because that's a similar thing. That's about saying actually we can adapt and think ahead about these things and behave in ways that will get us better outcomes. I mean, that's really what preventative health is about, isn't it? It's about thinking ahead. And that seems to me to be something that you've done along your career. I mean, is there a connection there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've gone from bedside treating patients who are terminally ill or have had chronic illness for all of their life and suffered that could have been preventative. I think it's a very prehistoric way of medicine that you're then again reactive instead of proactive. And I've worked obviously within the NHS, and there's been lots of incentives like the smoking cessation campaigns that have
Yeah.
happened along my career path. But even when you look at that, there was only 10, 15 years ago that they had this massive smoking cessation campaigns that were funded by the government in the NHS. And it's always a bit behind the times. However, that's not to say, I'm very fond of the NHS. I'm probably one of the very few people that are really grateful for the experience that I've got within it and the people I've got to work with, and it's got me here. Um, but the system is broken and it doesn't allow for real innovative growth. And even within research, by the time you've executed research and it's implemented, we're already kind of 10 years down the road and we've not impacted the health population as it is now. And that's why I feel really passionate about it, because it's not me being dramatic. I've cared and nursed for people who said, I just want to die, I've had enough.
Mm.
And for me, I emphasize all the time, it's not about longevity and living forever. I think that's slightly dystopian and slightly, it's just, we're not built for that. We're not set up economically for that as a population. We weren't ever supposed to live forever. And there has to be acceptance that death is part of life.
Mm.
However, what I do believe in is that everybody should have a peaceful death, and it should be within a certain limitation of control where they're not in pain and they're not suffering and they get the chance to be with their family. And it's a moment of life.
Mm.
And that's why, I think there's a lot that can be done around preventative medicine.
So let's just explore that a bit further because you're working on that at the moment. I mean, you just talked about, you do the research and then you have the campaign to prevent the thing. But that process means that you're inevitably well behind the curve. I mean, you described it being 10 years behind what's needed. How are you going to shift that forward? How do you help people get onto that kind of preventative agenda earlier than the kind of conventional thinking?
Well, I don't think I personally am, and I don't think my platform, I think it might have a element be able to do longer term research at a later date. But at the moment, what you've seen is an exodus of doctors who are now coming into this functional preventative medicine space, setting up clinics independently because they might share the same ethos as I do, because they've worked in acute settings. But they haven't got the business ability to understand what necessarily the data means. And then as this boom of longevity and functional medicine, which is also blurred up with preventative medicine, has come to market, I do feel that there is a ethical danger to clients going into it, thinking that it's a new buzzword and it's a new trend without the data behind it to support the outcomes of their health. And again, fundamentally, I am a nurse. I spent 20 years doing it. I do care about the people I look after, and I'm very NHS driven. It's kind of embedded in me. And so when I've looked at all of these clinics that I've worked with, and there's been about 20 plus, so this isn't even just stipulated one independent clinic, they're all using the same labs, they're all using variable systems, but they're all kind of hypothesizing on the outcomes because there isn't a larger randomized control trial on some of the pathways that they're putting these clients on. So what I wanted to do, I was like, well, actually, let's try and make this area of medicine authentically an area of medicine. But to do that, we've got to consolidate all of the data sets. And they're usually independent labs that are providing all of the tests for these clinics because they do specialist functional medicine. So then I started creating relationships with the labs, and I said, listen, you provide all of these clinics. You've got an operational nightmare on the back end of ordering. So let me try and clean it up, hence the name Pathway, that we have an integrated pathway. And it's literally a plug and play for clinics. But ultimately, it also then builds an AI model of data that actually can start consolidating true healthcare outcomes for authentic protocols of care that are based on the data that's coming in. So I think, and even if that has a small impact for a booming marketplace and it provides some safety and authenticity to what we're delivering, then that's my small bit of impact to the health population.
Yeah, I actually think it's probably bigger than you imagine. I mean, what you're saying to me, just to make sure I've understood this correctly, what you're saying is the sooner we get better data, the sooner we can really develop preventative approaches that are based on actual empirical evidence of what works and what doesn't work. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and I think, this is slightly controversial, but when I get decks and new things sent to me pretty much every other day. And when I see these things go to market, again, I feel passionately about giving patients good care. When you've seen somebody die and suffer, and there could have been a healthcare incident where there could have been something that's been input into their pathway that's made them suffer longer than they should have, or exasperated an illness. I don't want to be responsible for that. And I think any good healthcare practitioner doesn't want to be responsible for that. And so, yeah, I think if we can consolidate, and there are certain trials, and what I'm saying is when I get these decks, they're kind of things, and I'm like, where's the evidence? Where's your longitudinal studies on this? What have we consolidated? Because you're no different from, you're preaching about the pharma world being the devil. And then on the other hand, you're now technically commercializing some other element of whether it's a supplement or integration of, I don't know, like red light. I mean, red light has been good. I'm just giving examples, but we have to ethically be able to provide the best that's authenticated by outcomes, and it's not in a controlled environment. And there's a space for everything. I just believe that we have to try and kind of monitor and guide people into making the right decisions. And even if a patient wants to do something that's out of conventional medicine or out of study research, we can then at least provide them with all the information so they know what they're doing.
Mm. I mean, they're tough decisions, it seems to me that, and the value of the evidence is it helps you make tough decisions. The decisions don't get any easier. It's just that evidence helps you make the right one because you've got a better sense of what will and what won't work, which seems to me to be really important in healthcare. Well, I mean, and in places like education. Let me just ask you something you touched on. You touched on the kind of ethical piece. We've also talked in the past about your concern about getting the governance right. And it seems to me there's a linkage there with good evidence, ethics, governance. I mean, just explore that a little bit. I mean, why is that such an important feature of what you're working on?
Well, I think governance is fundamental to healthcare. And just because you're going to an independent clinic doesn't mean that it's not a healthcare practice. And anything can be, I think, I mean, I've been in coroner's courts, I've been to represent cases, I've seen pretty much, I mean, I've worked in London for most of my career. I've seen it all. So I can see what can go wrong. And
Mm,
it can be something really minor that goes drastically wrong and can impact somebody's life forever. And that's why when you're dicing with people's lives, irrespective of how small you may think that intervention is, governance is highly important.
mm,
And there has to be an element of standardization of protocols because yes, there's a commercial element to it, but we still all have a duty of care to the people we're providing that to. Um, and so, even around governance around data, lab data, I think that's a really interesting place. I'm really fortunate that Genova Diagnostics are one of my main partners, and they are a regulated laboratory. But they and Jeff, I think he won't mind me saying this, was, we've had some really good conversations around the ethical data we're giving back to patients from testing them. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of clients or patients, if I'm talking in terms of independent market space, that are going to get tests done and they're not accurate tests. So then how ethical is that in a governance framework to tell somebody that they've been diagnosed or they show symptoms of XYZ when actually the test hasn't come from a regulated lab and might not necessarily be accurate? And so when we talk about governance across healthcare and what I'm building, it's a broad spectrum of the highest quality governance. So when clinics are advertising independently and saying we're the best longevity centre, we're the best preventative
mm,
healthcare centre, well, prove it. Who's your partners? And that's what I'm saying with my platform. It's all integrated, it's all there. So it's all validated. So it gives everybody that assurance on what they're providing.
mm. And on that specific point about assurances, I mean, there are some areas. I mean, I was talking about this with a psychologist a little while ago who was saying, one of the reasons we know that things like CBT work is because there's been a lot of research. There are other areas where there hasn't been the research. I mean, how do you deal with those areas where there isn't actually good evidence, but people are saying this works for me? I mean, what's your take on that?
It's a really challenging one because I think this marketplace has changed. I think it's a post-COVID of people trying to take control of their life and being more in tune with themselves. I think it's very challenging because, like I said, there's a lot of products going to market quicker that
Mm,
aren't necessarily, I mean, if you look at GLPs and they've gone to market and you can buy them independently without, in many countries, without actually having to see a
mm,
doctor. And people are choosing to do that with the short, uh, there's trials, but there's not actually a large scale trial. And we're going to look at the impact of that in however many years when it actually has it. And I think people are looking at short-term gains without actually understanding the long-term implication. And again, that's what I'm hoping to build with this consolidation of data to monitor those outcomes. So even if people want to make those choices, we've got a really good track data set of monitoring it
mm.
for the future, at least. um, but yeah, I think it's a really challenging space and it's moving really quickly. And therefore, there is a certain degree of lack of governance
Mm.
around it.
I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about the healthcare sector is that it is moving faster. I mean, I think that, to come back to the COVID thing, I mean, we saw the development of vaccines extraordinarily quickly, and well done on the people that did that. but that also means there wasn't a huge body of evidence to say these will definitely work and there won't be terrible long-term effects. I mean, so there's an interesting balance to be struck there, where people are saying, "I want the benefits," and but I'm maybe willing to go down that road, even though I don't fully understand all the risks, which is a really difficult decision for people. And one of the things that strikes me about healthcare is that I wonder whether it needs to be better at helping people make those decisions. Because sometimes there still is an awful lot of uncertainty. I mean, you can't, I mean, not everything can have been tested for a long period of time if it's a new thing, can it?
No, and again, I agree entirely. And there's some phenomenal companies out there. I'm not a pharma company and I'm not a research
No.
company. But there are some amazing companies that I'm aware of that do AI generated research, which is speeding up
Mm.
this methodology of getting product to market quicker. Um, and I think that will change things really quickly. But I mean, a lot of it is, if you look at your average client, they're seeing all of the press around the blueprint methodology, the Brian Johnson effect, whoever other people of the world who are living these fantastic lives and optimized health. And that's great. But in reality, we don't know what's going on in the background, and we're only seeing the level of the marketing and commercial aspect. And that's, I think, come from the influx of TikToks and social media and everything that everyone's exposed to, in that instant gratification of, I want to change my life for the better now, and I'm just going to take this because I've seen that it's changed someone else's life, and so I'm going to do it without actually really doing the research around it. And that's why, again, in this area of medicine, we need to be responsible for sending out the right messaging, for educating, and if somebody wants to do it, supporting and monitoring effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point earlier on was a really powerful one about there's a duty of care on people not to missell, if to put it in commercial language. I mean, not to pretend that things aren't what they are, if you see what I mean. And I think the duty of care thing is a really important point that you've made. I mean, we don't. I mean, I think that's quite worrying. If you look back to COVID, it's quite worrying what some of the politicians talked about when clearly they hadn't taken the necessary steps to confirm whether things were or weren't, if you like. So they were, peddling, untruths, for want of a better way of putting it. And I think that is quite worrying. And that duty of care point is really important. But it is also the reality of today. Building a company in the modern world means that you build it in a social media environment. I mean, how are you approaching that with the business that you're building? And it's tough for you as it is tough for every other business out there.
God, I mean, I can't stand being on social media, and probably, yeah, I have to. It's been really challenging, actually. And it's interesting that you've just brought that up, because as a company of Pathway, it doesn't get the same traction as me as an individual. And I suppose part of that is the narrative of me coming from a nurse to here. And I guess it's interesting, maybe interesting, I don't know. And a lot of my posts are more about ranting, and probably, because I'm passionate about it and I want it to be right, and I see so much wrong with the industry that I want to have an impact on making it better. um it's really difficult. I mean, the companies that I also work with, um, it's again a fine balance in healthcare of what we put out there, what is educational, what's community building. And I think there's a lot of positives actually around social media and community building and shared education and informative,
Mm.
correct data and information. And then you're obviously going to have the extremes of the other side, where it's clickbait and it's to engage, and it may not necessarily be the right thing, but it's going to get the traction. And the balance with that is, how do you get enough interest to get people to watch and listen to what you're saying? So there has to be an element of being controversial or opinionated,
Mm.
but not spieling out a load of garbage that's going to harm people.
Yeah. Let me ask you, so do you see, I mean, is there an element of what you're doing that you see as campaigning? I mean, when I talk to most CEOs, it's about the mechanics of building a business. I build a team by doing this, and I, encourage, motivate them by doing that. And I mean, are you saying part of what you're doing is campaigning as well as being if you like, a conventional CEO building a a business? I mean, how do you see those two things? Because
Not really. I don't think so, because I think I'm problem solving. I think that this
right,
is already an identified problem. It's just nobody has taken the resource to build it together. So anyone I talk to recognizes the problem, understands the problem. In some ways, it's an easy sell. So all of the clinics and the labs that I speak to understand, they get it because it's their industry. Um, but I suppose the campaign element has come from a bit of frustration of I want patients to have the best and understand what's going on, because I think they think they're going into this glossy preventative healthcare system. They'll pay money, and their lives will change. And it doesn't work like that. And they have to be more informed about what they're actually doing and who are they seeing. So and I suppose that's probably just come from my passion of caring for people as opposed to for my company.
yeah, but it's also, I mean, to come back to the kind of doing it in a social media age. I mean, we're also in the age of conspiracy theories, aren't we? Where there's a small group of people that believe stuff that is pretty off the wall. Um, to come back to the point you've just made about informing people, I mean, I'm a fan of that. Obviously, it's good to give people the information to make sensible decisions. But there are always or there seems to be a small proportion of the population that simply don't believe what people like you say. I mean, how do you manage things like that? Because that seems to me to be, again, pretty fundamental to how you reach those groups of our society that are, I mean, almost excluding themselves.
Yes, but there's a place for everyone's opinion. And
Mm.
I quite like a bit of a challenge. And it's
I
also
would
good.
never have guessed that, Isabel. I
Yeah.
would never have guessed that.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And
Mm.
who's to know what's right and what's wrong? I can only vouch for myself. And these are I mean, I could sound like a conspiracist in what I'm spieling out now, but I believe in it. And the reason I believe in it is because I've worked in it, I've seen it, I've done it, lived it, breathed it, but so I can't, yes, sometimes they can be quite far-fetched opinions
Mm.
and quite challenging. But if that's their belief and they're causing no harm, they're
I'm
entitled.
thinking, I'm thinking of Donald. I mean, the thing that was going through my mind was Donald Trump saying, "Drink bleach." I mean, there's not a lot of evidence to support that particular theory, is there? I mean, so there is something in there that is challenging, is my point. It's not simply about informing people, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging, but again, I can't. I'm not going to save the world, and I'm not gonna. I'm not always right either. And you always hope that the good and the smart and the evidence outweighs the nonsense, and that people can be more informed than to listen to one opinion. And I think that's what I can get across. Like, my opinion is my opinion, but I may not be right. And there might be somebody else with a better idea than me or a more conflicting opinion to me. And they might be right because they may have more evidence.
Mm.
And that's okay, because that's the only way for evolution and growth. But yes, there are some dangerous opinions. I think what you're getting at out there, and how do you keep people safe in the dangerous aspects of high profile people out there? Um, I suppose I don't really have an answer. I just have to authentically be me and hope that there's a hundred other people that are equally maybe sensible and pragmatic from experience, and people will eventually hear us and see us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not an easy. It's not an easy problem to solve, I don't think. Let's come back to the process of building a business. I mean, tell me, what is it about what you, because there are other people out there that are doing stuff around kind of medical data, health related data, who make a similar argument. The better the data, the sooner we can move to, proactive rather than reactive approaches. We can prevent problems rather than wait for them to occur and try and fix them. What is it about what you're doing that gives you an edge on those other competitors in the market?
Let's face it, it's quite challenging. I think mine's more about how the current system is driven. So yes, we're building data, but actually what we're doing is, with that data, we're still giving autonomy to the data owners. And what I mean by that is, say, I might get data from a lab, but I will never own that data. It's always owned by the lab. Likewise, with the clinic, they own it to a certain degree. There is an underlay of the AI model and the LLM, but I think what people don't realize in a business entity that there are certain contracts of terms of what I'm allowed to do with that data because we're working with healthcare data. Therefore, it's very sensitive, very regulated. It's not a case of we just have a envelope passed under the desk and they hand over the data. There's a lot of legalities and governance around how I use that data. And comparatively to, I'm looking at a segment market that is untouched, that people don't assume to have such a high impact, which is the differentiating factor of probably my competitors to answer to your question. But what I'm trying to do is unsilo all of those data sets because I actually think they could have a meaningful impact to a healthcare population and how the healthcare system is moving. But and I think there's other things. It's really interesting because I look at competitors like, I mean, Whoop to some degree could be a competitor who've just advanced and now asking for people to upload their blood results and they're going to launch their Whoop testing. And that's great, but that's looking at a B to C. So that's having the consumer in control of their data and what they want to do. But ultimately, that consumer would have gone to a lab that probably will be a partner with Pathway. So that data will somewhat end up with me anyway for clinical outputs. And I think that's another interesting arena of this space. People get confused. What I'm building is an electronic health record system specifically for clinical use. What people use on the Whoop side, let's say, or wearables, is for them, it's not a clinical output tool. It's insights into your care, but it's not the whole picture. But yeah, this market, the market of AI is moving exponentially. The data sets that I have gained through my partners, I hope I can do my partners justice in how we utilize it. And remember, that's the other thing. My company is aggregating that data probably in a different way from another company. So I can't comment on how they're aggregating it and the outputs that they get as well. And then there's a whole other conversation about, if we're going down kind of like, if you're going to do an RCT almost and consolidate data, how am I doing that as a comparative and utilizing it, cleansing it, RAG rating it comparatively to maybe one of my competitors as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're also stepping into the unknown. I mean, because what you're saying is I'm going to take data from this silo, that silo, and another silo, and I'm going to bring them together, and we're going to see what we learn from that. Because you don't know what you're going to learn from that. I mean, you can make some assumptions that we could do, but you don't actually know until you do it, do you? So the other thing that strikes me that's challenging about what you're doing is you are really stepping into the unknown. You think that consolidation will bring benefits. There's only one way to find out, and that's to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's essentially like doing a whole PhD study on data sets. And it's luckily I work with people smarter than me. So, we can it's really interesting. And I think I also had some time at the National Institute in Health and Research. So it's applying those same principles of research to how we treat this data as well. And our partnerships with our labs are really engaged because they also want to understand the meaning behind some of the data that we're using and what can they do from a research and development element of making better tests. And that then to me is great because then that serves population to get better outcomes. So yeah, I mean, I'll let you know when we've
Yeah.
cleaned it all up
I
and
mean,
we know what we're doing with it.
yeah, no, and I'd love to hear about it. I mean, come back on and tell us because it'll be really interesting. Because I mean, what you're also describing is how challenging it is because it's not you can't just click your fingers and solve the problem. I mean, it's a much more complex and nuanced problem that you're working on. That
Yeah.
you illustrate that really well, I think, because it's a lot of people think, oh, it's just bring the data together and it'll be always all be sorted. And it's not quite that simple, is it?
No, it's really not. And I think back when I originally founded Pathway, it becomes more and more of a challenge. Sometimes it doesn't get easier, it just becomes a bigger problem. And you think, oh gosh, but then you're too deep in to be like, no, I've changed my mind now. but yeah, it's a lot, and it's interesting because the element of AI is really interesting. As in, yes, it can speed things up, but there's still human validation because you have to, there's you've got to have a bit of more subjective thinking applied to it as well. And then there's the data research, data scientists. We've got medical teams. It's a lot of work of validation. And then you go through another AI model. There's different methodologies of AI and how do we use that for pattern recognition and RAG rating, and goes on and on and on. So it isn't as easy as it
Bit of a
sounds.
never-ending journey, really. It strikes
Yeah,
me.
it's not a case of using a chat GPT open source and shoving it in and see what happens. It's far more detailed.
Yeah. And let me ask you about something that you mentioned. You talked about making mistakes. I mean, most entrepreneurs that I speak to will say they've made loads of mistakes. I mean, tell us about some of those things that have happened to you. I mean, have you ever had something that you thought, oh God, I've really got that wrong and I have to start again? Have you had experiences like that?
I've had it actually physically happen. And my top tip to any tech startup is you need to download GitHub and save all of your coding, because I
Mm.
lost everything in one sitting just by trying to change a font on coding. Um, and that was pretty devastating because that was a couple of months of work and there was no way to get it back. And I just had to start again. So that was a hard
Yeah. Yeah.
front lesson to learn. But at the time, I was really upset, and this I'm talking about hours of work of me staying up till 2, 3 in the morning coding and building, and then just one thing and losing it completely, and then staying up. I don't think I slept probably for a day or two, just trying to get back all of my work, and then came to the point of acceptance, and maybe I'd got this far and maybe I just had to start again, and that's what I did. um, so that was definitely a hard learning curve, and that was probably a reflection due to my not I don't necessarily I'm not one of these people that reads instructions one by one. um, so I probably missed that from just going straight in, and would have saved myself that headache. And again, I always think that assumption is the worst thing ever in business. Every time I've assumed something, it's normally been wrong, and I shouldn't have assumed and actually checked.
So, and let me ask you about the flip side. I mean, you've been very successful in multiple arenas. I mean, what would you attribute your success to? Presumably, it's not just making mistakes and learning quickly. I mean, what would you attribute your successes to?
um, Probably being quite adaptable. I'm content to
Mm.
pick things up quickly. I'm quite process driven as well. That's probably helped. I think whenever you're able to apply a process to an area of work, irrespective of what it is, um, that's always quite helpful. I don't really know. I think I just like a challenge, and then I think it's being curious and being open and thinking outside the box and wanting to move things forward. And I don't think I've never been somebody who can. I've always got to a job, and when I've got to the point of where I don't think there's any more I can learn and I'm not interested, I've moved on rather than stay in a job and stay bitter and be like, oh, this is rubbish, I want to change the system. So as soon as I start feeling like there's kind of frustrations, or I want to complain, or I think it could be better, that's my time to evolve and go into another work area and then learn more, adapt, and have the space to grow, I guess, and change things. And that hopefully those change are impactful and meaningful, and
Mm.
people have enjoyed maybe working with me, I hope.
I mean, I think it's interesting you describe it there because you sound like quite a lot of entrepreneurs that it's what really drives them is the motivation. It's the thing that they want to achieve, the challenge they want to overcome, and they figure out ways around everything else. But they've got that motivation. It seems to me, which is part of the entrepreneurial kind of mindset. I suppose is one way of putting it. Let me ask you about advice. You talked about working with lots of really interesting people in the past. I mean, would you say there's any one particular bit of really good advice that you've been given that you've followed that has helped you a lot?
I don't know, it's quite controversial, the best advice
Well,
that
go
I've
on.
had. it's and I was one I when I was on my way up of the leadership ladder, I used to become really frustrated with people for not being able to do what I wanted to do, or kind of resist it. And it was really challenging, or couldn't understand where I was going. And so this is the most idiotic advice. So the best advice is I got told that assume that everybody, the 99% of the population is really stupid. So therefore you need to slow down and break it down.
Right.
And the reason that's worked is because it's not that everybody's really stupid. It's because I'm not articulating it in a way that everybody can understand. And so that's why it's been quite impactful. So it may not have been articulated to me in the best way, but it was impactful because I think sometimes when my brain is constantly going and I'm working on 10 different projects in my head, like marketing, then there's software building, data sets, relationships, partnerships, and there's 1,000 things going on, and I've got to be the engine to drive it forward. Sometimes you talk at a faster pace or you miss out the middle bit. And it's not that people are stupid, it's because I haven't actually informed them or taken them from step one. So they haven't got the full story themselves, because I'm talking about probably one part of the jigsaw and forgot to tell them about the other 10 pieces. So that's been really, really.
Yeah, it's interesting you describe it though, because what you're saying is the best piece of advice that you've been given came in a package that you perhaps didn't like, which is, because what you're saying is communicate slowly and clearly and effectively, and it's pretty obvious that that will help you get things done more. But it was given to you in a package that you think, oh, not everyone's stupid. So it's funny how these things come to us in odd, but it's being able to decipher from all the things that come to you, the good stuff, the silver lining to the cloud, if you like.
I know it sounds quite awful. I'm working with all these medical geniuses, and that's the best bit of advice I could bring here.
Pretty valuable piece of advice, though, I would suggest. So, one last thing. I mean, I know you've got a lot of stuff on the horizon. I mean, tell us a little bit about some of the exciting stuff that you've got coming up.
Oh, I've got 1,000 exciting things. I mean, at the moment, we're on a bit of a roller coaster. We're going through investment at the moment, pending investors, which is also been a very big learning curve. And I'm hoping to close. I think mid-December is optimistic, but I would like to close mid-December and certainly have our term sheet done by then. We've got more partnerships with labs. We've got some clinics who are interested with letters of intent. So it's getting momentum. It's just got to get the funding to get to the next level. So it's very frustrating when you want to move forward because there's a bit of stalemate somewhat, and it's very difficult to keep motivated through that and keep moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy job, is it, being a CEO? I mean, it keeps you busy, that's for certain. I mean, Isabel, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, absolutely fascinating, really, really interesting insights there. I really appreciate that. And I think what you're doing is actually really powerful, probably more than perhaps people realize. So good luck going forward. I mean, and maybe come back at some point and let us know how you got on.
I'll tell you how it is on the other side.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, see you soon, Isabel.
Thank you.
Yes, bye bye.